When should cannabis use deny a patient an organ transplant? It's a more complicated question than you might think. This is by Dr. Sandeep Jawahar and Maria Avila. In 2023, Kentucky became the most recent state to pass a law prohibiting a denial of organ transplantation to patients solely because of their cannabis use. In other words, if you test positive for THC, you can't be denied an organ transplant. The legislation is set to go into effect January 1st, 2025. Over the past 11 years, similar measures have been enacted in 21 other states. These laws are part of a rising trend, although they overstep into medical decision-making. The point is that medical specialists should be making this decision based on evidence, and not the legislator. In 2023, 61 million Americans smoked, vaped, or otherwise consumed cannabis. As cannabis use becomes increasingly prevalent in American society, state governments are taking the lead in upholding the rights of cannabis users, including the right to medical treatments where they have historically been denied. At the same time, the medical specialists who set guidelines on transplant care have passed on setting standard directives on cannabis use, allowing individual transplant care programs to set their own rules. Some programs take a hardline approach, adopting zero-tolerance policies on cannabis. Other programs are more permissive, taking sort of a don't ask, don't tell stance. And still others have settled in the middle, allowing transplant for cannabis use after 6 months of abstinence, even in states that have passed the laws prohibiting such limitations. There is no consensus, which leads to disparities. Those patients with financial resources can travel to programs with the least limitations, whereas poor people cannot. Program shopping rewards the wealthy. About 100,000 Americans today are on an organ transplant waiting list, and approximately 6,000 die each year without a transplant. Due to Schedule I drug restrictions, rigorous data on the health effects of cannabis and transplants are limited. However, retrospective studies on liver, lung, and kidney transplant patients show no difference between cannabis users and non-users. Denying organ transplants to cannabis users is unnecessarily restrictive. It may deepen historical inequities, as cannabis users are disproportionately Black, and Black patients have historically been underrepresented on transplant lists. The guidelines should distinguish between occasional users and those with full-blown addiction. Occasional users should remain eligible for transplantation. Those with cannabis use disorder should, on the other hand, be ineligible for organ transplants, despite laws like the one about to go into effect in Kentucky, until they undergo addiction counseling and rehabilitation. The Biden administration is considering ending cannabis Schedule I status. Doing so will free up research money, which will take care of one of the problems. This opinion highlights how entrenched our medical industry is in old myths about cannabis. The assumption that cannabis use can cause problems with transplant is unfounded. And actually, there are some evidence that cannabis use may benefit those with transplants. Additionally, the damage that Schedule I status causes maintains the misunderstanding of cannabis. Cannabis use disorder might be used as a tool that marginalizes people when there's no evidence that cannabis users have issues with transplant. This opinion is a warning to those of us in the cannabis education space that we have a lot of work to do. Meanwhile, let's be vigilant about the studies that are making misleading claims. This is Dr. Jean Talleyrand with High at 9 News.
This is awful news. This is like so sad to me.
It's an opinion by some docs, but yeah, it really just shows what their mindset is.
Well, and Nick Bradley, who is, shout out to him, always in the comments causing chaos and confusion, was misdiagnosed with cannabis use disorder because they couldn't figure out why this poor guy was having these random awful seizures. Like, we need to quit sloughing things off and blaming a harmless little plant for issues that doctors can't figure out. It's okay to say, I don't know, we need to figure this out a little deeper, instead of saying, oh, well, Smoked weed? Probably it.
Yeah, I just want to point out that these diagnoses are really for billing purposes. They're not necessarily descriptive of real disorders. I mean, the whole DSM, psychiatric disorders and the method that they use are mostly for billing and not necessarily for accuracy in diagnosis.
No, okay, I understand that. And the billing codes often don't make sense, and that's fine. But I mean, I just think that how much more can you attack people, especially Black and brown people who probably aren't the highest on the list for that kidney anyway? So my grandma doesn't deserve to live, but yours does.
That's capitalism. I've seen several folks I know who are millionaires get to the front of the liver transplant list.
Yep.
And they were actually intravenous drug users who caught hepatitis in the 70s sharing dirty needles.
Well, you know what? They shouldn't
That's capitalism.
They shouldn't get a transplant.
Flourish, and the poor live under the fucking underpass. If you don't like it, come over to the socialist side. What we have here is we have generosity for all of our team members. That's right.
Stop trying to bring me places I don't want to go,
Matthew. Stop the ridiculousness. Socialism doesn't work, bro. You know it.
Healthcare and a clean, safe place to sleep.
America is a socialist nation,
guys.
No, I mean, we're trying to save it from that, but
no, you're not.
Yeah, we are.
Do you like police?
I do like police. Yeah.
Do you like your roads paved?
I do like paved roads.
Those are socialist services, man.
Socialism. No, that's not. No, that's
yes, it
not.
is.
Yeah, universal
taxpayer. Socialist, fire department socialist, military socialist.
Military.
No, giveaways that we give to large corporate farms to grow soy to sell to other countries.
You guys are totally You guys are
all the money we give to GM. That's socialist. All
you're gonna
make
his head explode. Please go on my friends.
We have a socialist fascist country where we give the majority of the money to the people who are already rich. Yeah. Why don't we give that money to the people that are fucking broke, and maybe we'd have less crime and strife? I don't know why this is radical, you guys.
Stop listing socialist policies. Jason's butthole can't poke her anytime.
Hey, you know what? MSG, just call everything communism, like Donald Trump said that he does, because nobody understands, nobody knows what Marxism or socialism really is. So just say it's communism. That's what they think that everything is.
Here's one that'll blow everybody's mind, and then I'll cede the floor.
Oh boy, here we go.
The October Revolution happened in Russia and was going successful and was peaceful, and they were actually redistributing the wealth. Women, for the first time in one of the places on the planet in thousands of years, had equal rights. German industrialists and the American, French, and English bankers funded Lenin to get put on a train because he's a right-leaning fascist authoritarian dictator. They had Lenin take over the revolution and crush it so that they could badmouth communism and socialism because they wanted to return to the Gilded Age, class stratification, and make you and me serfs. If you look around, they did a great job. We're now all wage slaves, and we are slaves with shackles in our minds because of the taxes and other services that we have to pay for.
Oh, boy.
You're right.
So just do some Googling, you guys. If you actually read books.
I have some real questions. I have some real questions on this.
Let's go, Jay.
No.
I have some real. We're not going down Mathieu St. Germain's rabbit hole of craziness.
All right, it was making sense. Back to you, Jay.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Dr. Mark and Dr. T. I mean, I know people that have had organ transplants and they were forced to cut their cannabis usage in order to be able to obtain these different organs. I mean, that can be seriously damaging, especially to people that are patients that are using cannabis for medical purposes to treat their ongoing condition, and then all of a sudden, because of the fact that, like, do you guys know of there being like actual real medical reasons that people would be denied an organ transplant because of cannabis use? Like, is there some type of chemical reaction that happens with some organs as opposed to others, or is this all just craziness?
It's just an unknown to these people, and so they're saying, because we don't know, let's be hyper vigilant about cannabis. But really, the proof is the opposite. There's a few retrospective studies that show that there's no difference between cannabis use and no cannabis use. And there's one study that actually recommended cannabis, I forget whether it was THC or CBD, for an organ transplant because it was an anti-inflammatory, and that's one of the important things with it, with tissue rejection, is you want an anti-inflammatory.
Any thoughts on this, Dr. Mark?
Well, the use of cannabis has been long documented, and Dr. T knows this, to in autoimmune disorders. And so, Dr. T, let's think about this out loud for a second. So in a transplant, right, you want to actually dial down your immune responses, right? Because there could potentially be an autoimmune response that rejects the transplanted organ. Am I correct on that, Dr. T?
That's right. Graft versus hosts. Yes.
Yeah. So I would think that it would actually be beneficial if, but there perhaps, again, I'm not a medical professional here, so I'll rely on Dr. T. Perhaps they're given drugs to dial down that autoimmune response, in minimizing the chance of organ rejection. And so could those autoimmune suppressants be, interacting with the way that cannabis and cannabinoids interact to suppress autoimmune function?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And that was one of the concerns that, we're already giving them immune suppressing drugs. You're going to give cannabis, which is going to interfere with what we're doing already. But a lot of those drugs have pretty serious side effects. With a higher risk of infection because you're suppressing your immune system. And so there's a potential that cannabis may be the right balance of reducing inflammation without the side effects of these prescription drugs. So just to assume that these approved drugs are better than cannabis is what I would say to those people who are making that argument that we're already giving them drugs, so why are you adding something more to it?
Okay, and in the comment section, Nick actually clarified that he did not get diagnosed with cannabis use disorder. He got diagnosed with suspicious THC overdose. I kind of actually want your thought on that, Dr. Talleyrand, because that sounds like another case of a doctor not understanding and being like, let's just write.
Sounds like total BS to me.
I mean, were you like mainline and distillate?
How do you overdose on THC? You just fall asleep.
That's not a diagnosis in the latest ICD-10 diagnosis. That's not a diagnosis. I looked up all the cannabis diagnoses.
I didn't think it was. I don't know why they put that on his paperwork, but he might have pissed him off. To be fair, we know.
Sounds like that doctor needs to be drug tested.
Sounds like Nick, you may have a malpractice suit on your hands, Nick. You might be able to get paid, buddy.
Tell him that. Good God.
I'm not a lawyer.
You better find a lawyer.
I take fees.
Medical malpractice lawyer.
Yep.
I can recommend you one if you want.
I work hourly.